I'm Pastoris. Welcome to The Story. Tonight we're going to delve into the tricky business of warning folks to fire danger. Now that might not be triggering to you if you live in the middle of a city or a town, but for those of you who live near or in our beautiful woods, that might put you on edge. And you're certainly not alone. Mapping the fire danger, that's our big story tonight. Oregon recently released a draft of a map that shows wildfire risk for every single piece of property in the state. And if that sounds familiar, well, it should. This is the second time the state has tried this. Back in 2022, a similar map was released, and a lot of folks with property suddenly deemed in the fire danger zone, well, they hated it, and understandably. The state then pulled the maps back within a matter of weeks. Now officials are hoping the second time is the charm. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has our story.
They say that everything old becomes new again. And that certainly seems to be the case with Oregon's wildfire risk maps. Last week, the state dropped its latest draft of a map that shows the level of risk for every piece of property in the state.
We are facing more fires within that period.
Andy McAvoy is a research assistant at the Oregon State College of Forestry. And he was one of dozens of people who helped formulate the most recent draft.
This is all aimed at protecting homes, property, and lives from future wildfire disasters.
But to understand why this is such a big deal, you've got to rewind a couple years to 2022. That's when the state released the first version of the map and immediately kicked up a firestorm of controversy. People were angry at what seemed like arbitrary classifications of their property. Here's what then State Representative Lily Morgan of Grants Pass told KGW at the time.
Where you have properties that have manicured landscaping, flat lands that is all green and is listed as extreme, where across the street you have vegetation that is not irrigated and clearly dry brush and it's not listed as extreme.
Residents were also worried about changes to their insurance, as one homeowner told us in a voicemail.
The insurance company, which happens to be Travelers, let me know that they were not going to be renewing because of the designation of extreme wildfire. This is going to cause a huge issue for property owners, both on the homeowner side as well as the business side.
The reaction to the first map was intense enough that the state rescinded it within a few weeks. So I asked McAvoy what that whole process was like.
Well, it was frustrating, is what it was. But I also really understood why people were confused and frustrated. The fact and the manner in which the map and the information related to the map was sort of just dumped at their doorstep because of really tight timelines that we couldn't change. That's really frustrating.
The 2 years since have given the state some time to slow down and think about how to change the map. The original map had 5 levels of risk, all the way from no risk up to extreme. That's been pared down to 3. Low risk, seen here in green, moderate risk in purple, and high risk, shown in orange. McAvoy said they also changed the way they classified some pasture lands, which lowered the risk level on nearly 2 million acres. And they altered the classifications for irrigated cropland, which knocked some 20,000 tax lots out of the highest risk category. And since 2022, Oregon passed Senate Bill 82.
And that specifically prohibits insurers in Oregon from using this wildfire hazard map to inform rating decisions.
These maps aren't just informative, though. Properties that are both in the high-risk category and also in the wildland-urban interface, seen here in darker orange, will soon be subject to stricter regulation. Property owners there will likely have to do more to create defensible space around their homes. And new construction in those areas could be subject to tougher building codes. So for the last month, McAvoy and other folks from state agencies have been traveling around the state. They've hosted open houses in places like Grants Pass, Klamath Falls, and LeGrand to give folks a preview of the maps and address their concerns.
I think they were really well received. There's still plenty of opposition. There's still plenty of confusion. But those open houses were a great opportunity for us to begin to answer those questions.
Now, there will still be some situations that might seem counterintuitive, like when adjacent homes are at different risk levels. But McAvoy said the science behind the thresholds for each risk category, climate, weather, topography, and vegetation, is sound.
There are going to be situations where neighbors fall just on either side of those thresholds, right? So just on the other side, one neighbor is going to be just above the high hazard threshold and one's going to be just below.
And while McAvoy acknowledged that not everyone will be happy with the maps, or with facing the prospect of new regulations, climate change has altered the way fires burn in Oregon. And so the state has to change the way it responds to fires.
We are facing a longer fire season. We are facing more fires within that period of time, fires in new places. We are facing unprecedented fuel conditions. So the context in which we're living and fighting fire is all changing. And we have to adapt to that as a state.
Cale's with me now, and so you talked about these regulations. What could they look like?
Well, they're still in draft form. The state is still working on them, but we get a little bit of a hint from California, where they just instituted some regulations like this in South Lake Tahoe. These are to create defensible space around your home, and so in South Lake Tahoe, 5 feet, you can't have any combustible material. So that's things like bark mulch, patio furniture, up to and including things like hot tubs. So it could be a bigger deal for some folks than others. And they're talking about putting in some stricter building codes. So this will, potentially have ramifications for what kind of materials are used in new construction. But they won't be retroactive. So you won't have to change anything that's already there, just for new stuff.
Okay, and the idea is when fire sweeps through, it'd be harder for your house to catch on fire.
Yeah, they talk about these things called ember showers, where,
Sure.
when you have strong winds, you're getting all these embers blowing in. And if you've got bark mulch right up against your house, you've got wood siding, it goes right up. But, if you've just got gravel around there, hopefully those embers grow up.
Yeah, or a shingle roof, for example, cedar shingles. When would this be instituted?
So we're in the midst of a comment period right now. It goes to August 18th, and that's when anybody, including you, can weigh in on what you think about these maps, whether you think they're good enough, there's things that need to be improved. After that point, they're going to take all this feedback, try to incorporate some changes that they think to make, which, will include feedback from county commissioners. At that point, it will go to the Board of Forestry. They'll finalize the maps, and that's when they'll send out letters to the folks who will be subject to these regulations. And those folks, they get those letters, they don't agree with them, they will have a chance to appeal.
Wow, okay, so quite a process going through this.
Yeah, but they're hoping to get it done by, sometime this fall.
Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you, Cale. Appreciate that.
Sure thing.
Moving on now to a follow-up on our Tainted Water series about groundwater pollution in eastern Oregon. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek says the state is now talking to the federal government to try and find ways to help the Port of Morrow pay for the massive water treatment plant it must build. The treatment plant is needed to strip more nitrates out of the water sent to the port by its industrial customers, which is then spread on farm fields. Here's the situation. A massive aquifer covering parts of Umatilla and Morrow counties is contaminated with nitrates. That's a big problem because thousands of mostly low-income people use backyard wells to get their water, and those wells tap into that contaminated aquifer below the ground. The nitrates are invisible, you can't taste them or smell them, but they are dangerous to humans, especially over the long term. We've been covering this for more than a year now. The state of Oregon has known about the contamination problem for more than 34 years and done little to nothing to stop the pollution from growing. In fact, the problem is worse today than when it was first discovered. I've been pressing government leaders for answers, wanting to know why more action is not being taken. And to their credit, the state launched a massive effort last summer to test the wells of everyone in the area, alert residents that water might not be safe to drink or cook with, and to start free water delivery for people with high levels of contamination. There are still hundreds to contact, though, and the state has sent additional mailings to those homes. On top of that, there is much, much more to be done. Today, in a rare coincidence, 3 of the key government players were all in one place to talk about environmental issues. Oregon Governor Tina Kotek, our region's administrator for the EPA, Casey Sixkiller, and the director of Oregon's DEQ, Leah Felden. I took the opportunity to ask them about the water contamination, the land that's affected. It's called the Lubguama. Here's part of my conversation with Governor Tina Kotek.
Specifically, what's happening with stopping the pollution going into the aquifer?
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for your coverage on this issue. Administrator Sixkiller and I were out there, when was that, April? We were out in the Guama. When we were out there, we made a commitment to having more clear benchmarks and targets for the communication with the residents, the testing, getting cleaner water. So that immediate need, so the Oregon Health Authority has put together a clear plan. I gave them some very clear directives. So we're moving forward there. We're in regular communication, the Department of Environmental Quality is, and EPA with the Port of Morrow about getting us through the next discussion about winter allocation, because that happens during the winter months when there's less ability for the land to take up the nitrates. So we're working on that. There'll be a different plan for this winter. It won't be zero, but it will be reduced, and that is a plan.
It's actually a very big plan, a big reduction. Here's the deal. The Port of Morrow has 46 companies connected to it. The biggest are food processors, which wash vegetables that are brought in from the fields and prepare them for shipping. The water from those companies all flows to the port, and much of it is contaminated with nitrates, a lot of which come from fertilizer used to grow those products. The port stores millions of gallons in holding ponds, but it also sends something like 7 to 10 million gallons a day out through a network of pipes to be spread on farm fields. Oregon Rural Action is a group trying to stop the aquifer pollution. They report that in June, the average amount of nitrates in Port of Morrow water was about 100 milligrams per liter. Now, under the port's newest permit with the state, it will need to reduce that to just 7 milligrams per liter by November. So that's the plan the governor is talking about. The EPA reports that the safe limit for nitrates in water is 10 milligrams. The state of Oregon has an even lower limit of 7. The port has said building a new wastewater treatment system could cost up to $200 million, and that is why it's looking for state and federal help. Governor Kotek confirmed the state is now helping look for that money. And by the way, the port's not the only problem out there. We also talked about farmers who put nitrate fertilizers on the field, none of it regulated.
Any work with the farmers on reducing the amount of fertilizer that goes on the fields?
I do think that's a long-term conversation that we want to take up with the Department of Agriculture, because that is the long-term issue, right? Many years of practice that have added to the aquifer. So figuring out how we can reduce that use is important, as well as the distribution from the Port of Morrow's employers when they're, but the ag issue is that long-term conversation we need to have.
Is there an executive order that you could just issue?
I don't think it's that easy. I'm not a farmer, but I do know that one of the conversations I've heard, there are cleaner and better ways to fertilize that we also need to approach, right? So I would love to have those conversations with farmers. We'll need the support from our Department of Ag to do that. But that is we don't want to do all these things to fix the small part and not have fixed the longer term issue. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the latest from the governor. I also got to talk with the director of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, Leah Felden.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, since we last got together to chat, I have also been out to the region, and we held a public meeting in partnership with the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Water Resources, as well as the Oregon Health Authority. And the real continuing work that is of most importance is that everybody who needs it can get clean drinking water. And OHA is working very hard to ensure that we provide everybody who needs it clean drinking water. They continue to test wells and to get samples analyzed. And I can't emphasize enough the important message that anybody who wants their well tested can get that done for free. So
if they're in the loop, Guama.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's really paramount importance. As we've discussed, the short-term work to make sure everybody has clean drinking water versus the long-term work, these need to be really different plans. The long-term work meaning to work to reduce the nitrate pollution into the groundwater for the region.
Are we any closer to taking any action that would start to reduce that?
The Department of Environmental Quality is responsible for the permitting of those who land apply industrial wastewater. And we have been revamping all of those permits to ensure that they are meeting specific limits that protect groundwater. So I'm really happy with the work that we've done on the permits and the enforcement that we've taken when needed. And going forward, DEQ is working with our partner agencies, the Department of Agriculture and Water Resources Department, to broaden the conversation in terms of agriculture in the region and what can be done to help reduce nitrate from the agriculture sector, and to talk about the information we have and gather data about the wells in the region.
So we may be closer to action, but other than cranking down on the limits for the port and perhaps others who already have permits, there is no new action, at least not right now. And for what it's worth, just because a permit says one thing does not mean that it will be followed. Through our reporting, we've told you how the Port of Morrow has violated its water permits some 2,000 times between 2007 and 2022, and then hundreds of times since, paying hundreds of thousands of dollars in penalties instead of following the permits. My final question today were for the Regional Administrator of the EPA, Casey Sixkiller.
Well, since the last time we spoke, Governor Kotek and I went out together to meet with members of the community. I'm really pleased to say that we are working in lockstep. Our teams met as recently as last week. One of the things we heard very clearly from members of the community was to have a transparent plan with milestones that everybody could track and see how we're making progress. And I'm really pleased with the work that we're doing together to deliver just that. And I'm hopeful by the end of the summer we'll be able to share that with members of the community. We've had great work going on by other departments here at the state of Oregon, including DEQ, Department of Ag, and Department of Health, of course, as well. So I feel like we are, as a government, doing what our commitment was to work as a whole government approach, do it together, stay in constant contact with members of the community, and make sure that we're following through on the commitments that we're making.
And as you know, there's a lot of frustration because there's been a lot of behind-the-scenes work, but not much actual specific work that would change anything. Is that something we could look forward to?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely the top objective for us, other than, of course, making sure that folks have access to safe drinking water, is to make sure they have a plan that they see themselves in. And I think that also was a very clear message that we got when we were down together in the Umatilla, and making sure folks knew what was happening, that we weren't just the government showing up and telling them how we're going to solve their problem, but they could see and they could provide feedback, and then we can work together moving forward.
So there you have it, 3 leaders, all with some pretty big time clout in their respective fields, weighing in on what's happening with contaminated water. What's going through your mind now after hearing each of them and what they had to say? Are you impressed? Not so much? Have other thoughts? Email us, will you? The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. By the way, the real reason those 3 government leaders were in town today was to celebrate an announcement that Oregon is getting almost $200 million from the EPA to take on pollution. The grant will help pay for programs for clean energy building, transportation, and other initiatives. Overall, more than $4 billion from the Inflation Reduction Act is going to states across the country. That $197 million coming to Oregon makes it the largest federal grant being awarded this time in the Pacific Northwest. Coming up next on The Story. In the state of Washington, ballots are in the mail for the August 6th primary. We have a new poll and new numbers for you on the U.S. Senate race that you'll be voting on, as well as an interesting look at what issues Washington voters want their new governor to tackle and how to go about doing that. It's all coming up next when The Story returns. And now to the great state of Washington, where this past Friday ballots were mailed out and official ballot drop boxes were opened for the August 6th primary election. Those ballots must be returned by 8 o'clock on the 6th or postmarked by that date if you plan to mail it in. All of Washington's 39 counties have races on the ballot, totaling 654 elected positions and 94 local measures. The top 2 vote getters for each office move on to the general election in November. Let's bring you some results from an exclusive Survey USA poll done by our sister station King 5 in partnership with the Seattle Times and UW's Center for Informed Public, which polled 564 likely primary voters. There's only one U.S. Senate race on the ballot, and incumbent Democratic Senator Maria Cantwell leads her closest challenger by more than 20 points. Republican Raul Garcia is trying to become the first person to unseat Cantwell, who's won 4 consecutive terms dating back to 2000. Garcia is a doctor from Yakima who previously ran for governor before shifting his focus to the Senate. Maria Cantwell is the 12th longest tenured U.S. senator in Congress. We previously showed you results for the governor's race. 42% said they would vote for Democrat Bob Ferguson. He's the current attorney general. 33% are backing Republican Dave Reichert. Republican Semi Bird is at 7%. Democratic State Senator Mark Mullet received 4% of the votes, and 14% say, yeah, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. The poll also asked voters how they think Washington's next governor should handle issues like crime and homelessness and the cost of living. Because there's no incumbent, the Governor Inslee is not running for re-election. Whoever wins in November will be able to implement their own approach to these issues. Farah Jada has our story.
Right now, Democrat Bob Ferguson and Republican Dave Reichert are the leading candidates in the race for governor. The August 6th top 2 primary will decide who ends up on the November ballot. We asked voters how they think Washington's next governor should address crime. We gave them a list of solutions and asked them to choose 2. The top results: hire more police officers, fund more mental health care, impose stricter sentences, and fund programs to fight poverty. We discussed the results with King 5 political analyst Rob McKenna and Gary Locke.
They're not just saying lock them up and throw away the key. So I think it's a pretty sophisticated, nuanced view that voters are taking against a backdrop of saying to the next governor, this is our number one issue.
It clearly shows that the voters understand the complexity of crime, that there needs to be not just enforcement, even-handed enforcement, but also to treat the underlying causes to prevent people from going through the criminal justice system over and over and over again.
The top results from voters on solutions for the homelessness crisis include more mental health care funding, expanding drug and alcohol treatment, and building more shelters. When it comes to the cost of living, voters believe the best solutions are building more affordable housing, lowering taxes, and lowering the cost of health insurance. We spoke to candidates Ferguson and Reichert about these recommended solutions.
What I heard the most frequently from voters across the state, urban, rural, red, blue counties, wherever it was the need for more affordable housing. So in other words, meeting with Microsoft executives who want more affordable housing for their workforce coming from all around the world, to a business owner in Eastern Washington who has a restaurant in a tourist town who's had to make his restaurant open fewer hours because his workforce cannot afford to live near his restaurant. That's been there for many years.
Regulations and the acquisition of building permits is so cumbersome, that it slows down the building process and actually adds about $30,000 per structure as we go forward and look at how we want to build out housing. We really need to take a look at the impediments caused by government.
Interesting stuff. What do you think about these poll results on major issues? Do you disagree with any of them? Why or why not? Shoot us an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. We love your input. It's what makes this show special. Please keep sending it. And keep it right here. We're back right after this. Oh my gosh, look at the time. That's the end of our show. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, the story, our collective story, well, that never ends. Straight Talk with Laurel Porter is coming your way next. I'll see you right back here tomorrow night at 6:30.